For 7 years, beginning in 1946, the French Union fought a desperate war to keep control of its colonies in Southeast Asia, in the face of a determined and ruthless communist adversary. This is the story of a brutal colonial conflict in Vietnam that became a crisis of global importance, with each side obtaining powerful allies as the causes of anti-communism and anti-colonialism collided in dramatic fashion. For a time after war began between the French and Communist Vietnamese in 1946, it was largely a guerrilla conflict, with neither side able to gain the upper hand. The French lacked the numbers to destroy Communist base areas in rural areas, especially in the northwest of the country, and the Communist Viet Minh lacked the equipment to take the fight to the French anywhere close to its garrisons in major towns and cities. Both sides made up for their weaknesses with brutality. Roads in rural areas became hotspots for communist ambushes and kidnappings, and local villages were brought under control through persuasion or intimidation, with fatal consequences for local chiefs that resisted. The French, for their part, burnt villages suspected of harbouring Viet Minh fighters and killed those who opposed them. A new phase to the conflict began in 1949, when the Chinese Civil War ended in a communist victory. Suddenly, the Viet Minh had a powerful ally right on their border, able to provide training, military advice, and copious amounts of weapons. The communist leadership under Ho Chi Minh decided this was the time to step up its campaign and begin the formation of a regular army that could go toe-to-toe with the French in open combat. Over the course of the next 25 years, China supplied North Vietnam with a huge amount of equipment, including vehicles very important to today's sponsor, World of Tanks. World of Tanks is a free-to-play game that lets you take command of over 800 tanks of all different shapes and sizes from a variety of nations and different eras of tank design. This includes the Type 59, a Chinese tank provided in large numbers to North Vietnam and used extensively in the final years of the war in the 1970s. Joining the Type 59 are dozens of tanks from all of the nations that took part in fighting in Vietnam, and a lot more besides. From light tanks to tank destroyers, artillery, and the heaviest of armoured vehicles. How you play is up to you. You can battle these tanks out across a variety of vast landscapes before upgrading and modifying your vehicle to be ready for any challenge that comes your way. If you'd like to try World of Tanks out for the first time, you can use the link in the description along with the code COMBAT to get a starter pack including 250,000 credits, a week of premium account access, and a tier 6 British tank, the Cromwell B. You'll also get access to 3 other tanks for a limited number of battles, including the famous Tiger tank. World of Tanks are also partnering with Madrina's Coffee, offering a limited edition bundle that contains coffee and premium account time that you can get at the link in the description. Thank you to World of Tanks for supporting this video. It took until the following spring for the first division of this new People's Army of Vietnam to be ready. The 308th Division had its first outing with a successful attack on a French outpost at Pho Lu before attention turned eastwards, towards key colonial garrisons on Route 4, close to the Chinese border. Route 4 had been the scene of growing fighting over much of the previous 2 years, as it functioned as a crucial supply route for French troops holding the border with China. Getting convoys of trucks up this road without large losses had become increasingly difficult, and the garrisons of Cao Bang, Dong Quai and Lang Sun had become increasingly isolated. Now the Communist Army, under its commander Vao Nguyen Giap, planned to sweep the French entirely from the area. An initial attack on Dong Quai in May 1950 was ultimately repelled after the French dropped in an airborne parachute battalion as reinforcements, but in September Giap returned after the monsoon season and overwhelmed the defenders. This cut French control of Route 4 and left the garrison at Cao Bang completely cut off. French troops there were ordered to evacuate and head south, where a relief column from Lang Sun under Colonel Lepage would meet them. But on October 2nd, the relief column was stopped south of Dong Quai by a strong communist force, and Lepage was forced to take his troops west into the hills in an attempt to continue the journey north. Almost immediately, they were bogged down by intense Viet Minh attacks in the rough terrain, and by October 4th, their situation was desperate. The column coming from Cao Bang under Colonel Pierre Charton was ordered to abandon its heavy equipment and rush to Lepage's aid, heading off Route 4 onto a small trail to reach the area. Progress was slow and Vietnamese harassment intense. The two forces linked up on October 7th, but found themselves by this stage hopelessly surrounded. The French troops tried to break out south, but were pummeled by communist battalions as they went, and the formation was eventually destroyed. In the end, only 600 men returned to French lines, with 4,800 casualties taken. Giap quickly exploited this victory to push south and seize Lang Son on October 18th, delivering control of almost the entire border with China into communist hands, securing more routes for supplies to reach the Viet Minh. For the French, the defeat along Route 4 was a huge blow to prestige and to morale. In response, the Commander-in-Chief of Indochina, General Marcel Carpentier, was dismissed and replaced by General Jean de Lattre de Tassigny. General de Lattre was brought in to steady the ship, and on his arrival in December 1950 set about turning things around. He sacked defeated officers and resolved there would be no retreat from the north of Vietnam, even as the French position there looked precarious. De Lattre knew that the Red River Delta area around Hanoi was a rich source of both food and manpower, and he was not about to give them up to the Viet Minh. The new commander was determined to hold his ground. To do so, he formed new mobile groups of French troops that could take the fight to the Viet Minh wherever they were, while static defensive duties will be gradually taken over by a newly recruited pro-French Vietnamese army, which would garrison a new line of fortifications around the delta. The general was helped in this by aid from the United States, which began to ramp up after the defeat on Route 4. The US in 1950 was reeling from the loss of China to communism and was committed to containing its spread, even if that meant supporting a colonialist empire. A $150 million aid package was approved in early 1951, yielding 7,200 tons of equipment in short order. From here on, the American commitment to Vietnam would only increase. After their successes on Route 4 and with more divisions becoming available, the Communist Army tried to break through de Lattre's line of fortifications immediately. In January 1951, Giap launched a frontal offensive at Dien. The 308th and 312th Divisions, some 22,000 men, were launched against prepared positions held by two of the new mobile groups, totaling less than half that number. But over 4 days of fighting under the personal command of General de Lattre, the French used extensive air support and artillery fire to crush human wave attacks, inflicting between 12 and 15,000 communist casualties and sending both divisions fleeing in disarray. Giap had been overconfident and reckless. His army had almost no anti-air weapons, which meant they had been powerless to stop the French using US-supplied napalm for the first time to devastating effect. Over the next 6 months, Giap tried twice more to push into the delta but found his troops thrown back with heavy losses each time, unable to stand up to French firepower in open battle. It was a disastrous 6 months for the Communist Army. Suddenly, it was them on the back foot, forced to accept that they could not match up to French combined arms firepower in the open terrain of the Red River Delta. A period of recovery and re-equipping was now needed for the Communist Army after all the losses, so Giap shelved further mass assaults. Instead, he opted to keep the pressure up by deploying troops in small groups to infiltrate the Red River Delta and disrupt French control of the most valuable rice-growing areas in northern Vietnam. By this stage in the war, the battle for rice had taken on a huge importance. The Communist Vietnamese had an especially acute need to get more of it, as the more mountainous areas they controlled did not produce enough food to sustain their growing army and state bureaucracy of more than 250,000 people. Rampant inflation in the price of rice, over 350% between January and June 1950, was a severe drag on the communist economy, and a problem which the Chinese could not help with, as they needed all of their own food for domestic consumption. The solution then was to seize what was needed, and concerted raids were launched to seize rice from villages in the delta under French control. Colonial authorities responded by flooding rice-growing areas in both north and south with troops. extensive fortifications were built and a buffer zone around the Red River Delta implemented, across which no goods were allowed to cross. 100,000 residents were forcibly relocated away from this zone, and the French army given permission to fire on anyone caught in the area. General Raoul Salon, who replaced de Lactre as commander-in-chief after his death from cancer in December 1951, got permission the following year to step up the Rice War by targeting for the first time food infrastructure in areas controlled by communist forces. This meant a ruthless bombing campaign, including the use of napalm that began against rice-growing areas in Thanh Baksang and Phu Thao provinces. Bridges, irrigation systems, herds of livestock and rice fields themselves were all bombed intensively. Rice production in Thanh fell by 72% and in Baksang by 2/3. Tens of thousands of civilians died, as the French, according to historian Christopher Goscher, collapsed the dividing line between combatants and civilians and between the home front and the battlefront, the two core definitions of total war. As the economic war raged, the military one was in a stalemate during 1952. The French continued to struggle for manpower, with Paris unhappy about the spiralling costs of the war and often too caught up in domestic political upheavals to provide effective direction. French forces had retaken and held Hoa Binh against repeated attacks in late 1951, but found that with resources committed here, the Red River Delta was too poorly protected against Giap's incursions, and so withdrew in February 1952. The Vietnamese were also not happy, having struggled again to overcome French positions in fixed battles. They decided that a major problem was that they were fighting too close to Hanoi, where French supply lines were short and manageable. Giap decided to change approach and launch an offensive into the Northwestern highlands to take control of the remaining bit of the Chinese border still in French hands and threaten Laos, another of France's Southeast Asian colonies. In October 1952, 3 divisions fell on an isolated French garrison at Nha Lo and overran it, along with parts of Sun La province. French troops under Colonel Marcel Bijard fell back to Nha San, where they were heavily reinforced by air, as General Salon decided to turn it into a fortress to check the communist advance. The garrison swelled to 12,000 troops, and when Giap's forces arrived on November 22nd expecting another victory, they were thrown back with heavy casualties. It was a decent victory for the French, showing that isolated garrisons could be sufficiently supported and resupplied by air alone to enable the defeat of communist units in pitched battles. It was an idea they would return to. But despite this success, the Vietnamese were able to simply bypass the fortress at Nha San and move west, capturing Dien Bien Pho, right on the border with Laos. As well as this, the commitment of 12,000 troops to the highlands had weakened the French presence in the delta significantly, allowing the communists to make progress there, bringing 600 more villages under their control over the duration of the campaign. The French command found itself caught between a rock and a hard place, without the strength to defend everywhere adequately. Choosing to ensure the delta remained as secure as possible, the French were forced to give up much of the remainder of northwestern Vietnam it still held, and parts of the border regions of Laos too. By this stage, it had been a long and exhausting 6 years of fighting for both sides, and the prospect of peace negotiations was beginning to appear on the horizon. On the French side, support for the war in Vietnam was incredibly low, and the French government was by now looking for a way out. In May 1953, General Salon was replaced by General Henri Navarre, who arrived with a mandate to use military power to leverage a better position for eventual negotiations with the Viet Minh. 2 months later, the war in Korea ended, and both China and the US flooded more supplies to their respective sides in Vietnam. Navarre decided to use these increased resources to try and cement the French position in the delta, while building strength for a decisive victory against the communists that would secure favourable peace terms. The communists were also uncertain about what to do. The pitched battles at Nha San and Hoa Binh had proven costly, but the increased French strength in the delta was making it difficult to operate there. In November 1953, Ho Chi Minh signalled in an interview with a Swedish newspaper that the Viet Minh were willing to explore peace negotiations. Just like the French though, Ho wanted a large victory first to strengthen their hand. And so, as both sides spoiled for a single decisive battle, communist troops advanced on Lai Chau province, prompting the French to respond with an airborne drop and the creation of a fortress at Dien Bien Pho, to block communist movements and act as a base to strike them from. The decisive moment of the First Vietnam War had arrived.